All stats, 0. Strength, 0. Intelligence, 0. At the bottom, in large letters, the word error. The crowd gasped, but the boy looked at the panel and smiled for the first time that day, because for everyone else, there was a ceiling listed under the numbers, but for him, there was no ceiling at all. But let's go back a couple of minutes. The cold of the stone slabs hits his knees before his vision returns. Then comes the sound, the murmur of the crowd, someone's sob right nearby, the smell of incense, wet wool, and something sour. That's what fear smells like. Daniel So opens his eyes and recognizes nothing. Not the ceiling of his apartment, not the hospital lights. An old man in a white robe with gold embroidery stands over him and looks at him the way one looks at a dead bird, with contemptuous pity. The old man removes his finger from his forehead. He turns to the crowd. He utters a single word. Mistake. The crowd buzzes. The woman on his left falls to her knees and presses him against her so tightly it's hard to breathe. She smells of herbs, sweat, and salt. She cries silently, and her tears drip onto the top of his head. And Daniel realizes two things at once. This woman considers him her son, and he is no longer Daniel. So, he is in a foreign body, in a foreign world, on a stranger's lap. A blue translucent panel hangs before his eyes. It flickers faintly, like a phone on its last % of battery. 6 lines, and a 0 beneath each one. And at the bottom, in large letters, a single word. Error. But Daniel's brain works fast. It has always worked fast. Even when he was lying on the icy steps by the entrance and felt the back of his head getting wet and warm, he wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking that he hadn't checked the sample. Now he's thinking the same thing. The body is small, the arms are thin, height 5'4", age, at a glance, 6 or 7. His vision is poor, but the panel is clear. So the panel isn't in his eyes, it's in his head, the interface. He exhales. He breaks free from the woman's grasp. She looks at him with wet, red eyes, and there is so much pain in them that for a second he forgets about the zeros. He simply sees a mother who has been told her child is broken. And then he does what no one expects. He stands up. His legs are shaking, his knees are scraped raw on the stone. And right there, in front of the temple, he squats down. 1, 2, 3. The crowd doesn't notice. The mother freezes in confusion. He does 10 squats. On the 7th, he almost falls. On the 10th, he feels sick. But he isn't looking at his body. He stares intently at the panel. Power, 0.3 thousandths. 3. From 10 squats by a 7-year-old with a 0 baseline. He sits back down on the stone and closes his eyes. His heart is pounding. It's thumping in his temples, but inside his skull, it's quiet and clear. He's seen this 1,000 times, on graphs, in tables, in the dissertation he never finished. Linear growth from 0, a constant coefficient, no decay, no plateau. And this is where the strangest part begins. Everyone else has an upper limit beneath their numbers. He saw the old man's panel when he leaned over. An IQ of 34 out of 40. Out of 40. The ceiling. But beneath his zeros, there is nothing. Not 0, not a dash. Empty. The field is simply missing, as if someone had deleted a row from a table. In statistics, this is called an undefined upper limit. In practice, it means one thing. There is no ceiling. He opens his eyes and looks at his mother. She expects him to cry. He doesn't cry. He speaks quietly and evenly. "Mom, everything's fine. I'm just different. Let's go home. I'm really hungry." She shudders, not at the words, at the voice. 7-year-olds don't talk like that. That's how people who've already made up their minds talk. She takes his hand and leads him down the dusty road away from the temple. He walks and counts his steps. On the 100th step, he looks at the panel. Endurance, 0.1000. He nods to himself. The road to the village of Terran takes 2 hours. He memorizes every turn. His mother's name, Sarah. The name of the village. The bush with white berries by the gate. The leaky roof on the left. 14 jars of herbs in the cupboard that his mother arranges by scent because she can't read. He memorizes everything because he needs the data. On the first night, he lies on the floor by the stove. His mother has turned her back to the wall and is crying into her pillow, trying not to wake him. And he stares at the ceiling and thinks. Not about Boston, not about the stairs. That's all for later. Right now, data. Strength gained from squats, endurance from walking. Agility is lacking because he hasn't done anything for coordination. Intelligence, 0. And that's interesting. He's been analyzing this new world for 2 hours, and his intelligence hasn't budged. So thinking doesn't count. Action is needed. Reading. He gets up from the floor, creeps over to the shelf, finds a scrap of fabric with letters on it, the packaging from something. The letters are foreign, but his body remembers the language. He reads one word, a second, a third. Looks at the panel. Intelligence, 0.1000. It's working. He puts the rag back and lies down. He needs a plan, not for tomorrow, for a year. His body is weak. The world is foreign. His mother is poor and sick. The village calls him a reject. The temple calls him a mistake. No money, no friends, no protection, no class. Just a panel of zeros and an empty space where everyone else has a ceiling. And he smiles in the darkness. For the first time in this endless day, because his whole past life he'd been searching for one thing, a system with no upper limit. And finally, he found it. The morning began with pain. His whole body ached from yesterday's 10 squats, as if he'd unloaded a train car. The muscles of a 7-year-old with 0 baseline turned out to be even weaker than he thought. Kyle lay on the floor and waited for the pain to become bearable. Then he looked at the panel. Strength 0.003. Nothing had changed overnight. So sleep doesn't grant gains. Or maybe it does, but not in strength. He checked all 6 stats. Everything was the same. All zeros except for 3 tiny numbers. All right, first conclusion. Growth comes only from action. There is no passive growth. Second conclusion. Pain does not affect the metrics. He was in pain all night and gained nothing. So the system counts only the action itself, not its consequences. His mother was already up. He could hear her clattering with something by the stove, the smell of porridge. He got up and went out into the common room. Sarah turned and looked at him with that particular expression he was beginning to recognize, anxiety mixed with tenderness. She set a bowl in front of him, porridge made from a grain resembling millet, no butter, no salt. He ate it all. His body craved food like an empty tank craves fuel. After breakfast, he went out into the yard. The yard was small, a fence made of crooked poles. Beyond the fence, a field. Beyond the field, a forest. The air smelled of earth and morning dew. He started with the basics. 10 squats, 10 bends, 10 toe raises. After each set, he looked at the panel. Squats, Strength 0.003 became 0.006, plus 0.003 for 10 reps. Bends. Agility went from 0 to 0.002. Toe raises. Stamina went from 0.001 to 0.003. He sat down on the ground and thought. Different exercises yielded different gains in different stats. Squats went towards strength, bends for agility. But bends yielded less than squats for the same number of repetitions. So the type of movement matters. Or the starting level affects the rate of increase. Or both. He needed more data. He spent 3 hours in the garden. His mother peeked out the window every 10 minutes. He could see her shadow behind the curtain. She didn't come out. She didn't interfere. She just watched. In 3 hours, he tried 26 different movements. Push-ups against the fence, running in place, jumps, stretching, hanging from a branch, torso twists, rollovers, crouch walking. He did 10 reps of each exercise and recorded the result. He kept track in his head because he didn't have any paper. By noon, he had a table. Strength. The best gains came from bodyweight squats and push-ups, about 0.003 per 10 reps. Agility. The best gains came from rolls and jumping turns, about 0.004 per 10. Endurance. Best gain from running, about 0.005 per 5 minutes. Intelligence. Didn't increase from any physical activity. Need to check mental exertion. Perception. It increased by 0.001 when he spent 5 minutes trying to make out a bird in the forest. Charisma. 0. From nothing. Needs contact with people. He lay down on the grass and closed his eyes. His body ached. His muscles trembled. But his mind was clearer than ever. He now knew what mattered most. Growth is linear and predictable. No sudden jumps, no random bonuses. Every action yields a fixed increase. This was both good and bad at the same time. Good because he could plan. Bad because growth was slow. Monstrously slow. At his current rate, it would take him a year to reach a strength of 1. A year of daily training for a single point. A village boy with the warrior class started at a strength of 5, a good warrior at 20, an elite warrior had 40 or more. Kyle, with his zeros and thousandths, looked like an ant next to a horse. But an ant doesn't stop. He stood up and went into the house. His mother was sitting at the table sorting through herbs. Her back was hunched. Her shoulders were slumped. She moved slowly and winced with every turn. Her back. He remembered. Just yesterday he'd seen her walking from the temple. How she winced with every step. Chronic pain. He sat down beside her. "Mom, show me your back." She looked at him in surprise. He repeated himself. "I need to take a look." She turned around slowly. He placed his hand on her lower back. Nothing happened. No window, no panel. He simply felt the muscles beneath the fabric. Tense, hard, like a rope. All right. He couldn't read other people's windows yet, but he could read the body. He pressed his fingers slightly to the left of the spine. His mother flinched. "It hurts." He pressed to the right. "That hurts too." He pressed lower. Tolerable. The picture was coming into focus. The lumbar muscles in constant spasm. Most likely compensatory. The body protects the spine from strain and, as a result, breaks itself. He'd seen this dozens of times. Not in this world, in the past. In the neighbor down the stairwell who carried bags from the store. In the mother of a classmate who had worked as a mail carrier for 30 years. The solution was simple. Not medicine, not magic. Movement. The right kind of movement. He showed Sarah 3 exercises. Lying on your back, pull your knees to your chest and hold. Lying on your side, lift your top leg and hold. Standing against the wall, slowly slide down until your knees are at a right angle and hold. Her mother looked at him with the expression of someone who doesn't understand what's happening, but trusts him. She tried the first exercise. She groaned. He gently adjusted the position of her hands. Not like that, like this. Hold it. Count to 20. She counted, eyes closed, teeth clenched. On 20, he said, "Rest." She lay there and breathed. Then she looked at him. There was something new in her eyes. Not anxiety, not pity. A question. "How do you know this?" He answered without hesitation. "From the old man at the market." She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she didn't ask. She just nodded. That evening, he went out to the garden and trained for another hour. Then he went inside and found a second scrap of fabric with writing on it. He read it 3 times. His IQ dropped to 0.004. Then he lay down and did mental math. He added 2-digit numbers, then 3-digit ones. Intelligence became 0.006. The math was working. Before going to sleep, he checked all his stats. Strength, 0.024. Dexterity, 0.018. Stamina, 0.019. Intelligence, 0.006. Perception, 0.003. Charisma, 0. 2 days, 24 thousandths of a strength point. He calculated in his head. At the current rate, 1 strength point in 42 days. Provided the growth doesn't slow down, provided he trains every day, provided his body doesn't break down. A lot of conditions. But he had something no one else in this world had. Time and a formula. He closed his eyes and fell asleep on the floor by the stove. Behind the wall, his mother was quietly doing her exercises. He could hear her counting to 20 in a whisper, like a prayer. The week passed in silence and routine. Morning, porridge, the garden, training, lunch, reading something, training, dinner, exercises for his mother, counting in his head. Sleep. Every day the same. Every day a little more than yesterday. By the end of the first week, his stats looked like this. Strength, 0.09. Agility, 0.07. Stamina, 0.08. Intelligence, 0.03. Perception, 0.02. Charisma, 0. He was still weaker than any healthy child in the village. Any. Even the blacksmith's 3-year-old daughter. But the numbers were growing every day, and he knew they wouldn't stop. The problem lay elsewhere. The village had started to notice. Not the numbers, of course. Only he could see the numbers. The village noticed his behavior. The boy with the error instead of a class suddenly stopped crying and began doing squats in the garden at 6 in the morning. The boy with the zeros suddenly spoke evenly and calmly like a grown man. The boy, whom the priest had declared a defect, suddenly began teaching his mother some movements that made her feel better. The first to arrive was the neighbor Bitten, an old woman with a red face and a kind heart. She brought a pot of soup and sat with Sarah for an hour. Kyle heard their conversation from behind the door. Bitten said the boy was strange, that maybe he'd been jinxed. Or the opposite. Maybe the mistake in the window was a sign. Maybe the temple had made a mistake. Sarah was silent. Then she said that Kyle was just playing, that kids play all sorts of games, that it would pass. She was defending him. He understood that right away, and he realized that she was afraid too. The second to arrive was Uncle Rand Varon, Kyle's late father's cousin, the only relative with any standing. Warrior class, potential 47. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the heavy gaze of a man accustomed to being feared. He didn't bring soup. He came to talk. Kyle was sitting on the porch when his uncle approached. Rand stopped in front of him, looked down at him. "What are you doing?" Kyle looked at him. "Sitting?" Rand crouched down. His face was close. He smelled of ale and sweat. "I was told you're doing squats, running. Teaching your mother something? Why?" Kyle thought for a second. "I just like it." Rand pressed his lips together. "Listen to me, boy. You're wrong. You're empty. That's not shameful. It's shameful to pretend you can do something. People are watching. They're talking. Your mother has suffered enough. Don't add to her shame." Kyle looked at his uncle and counted. Not the numbers on the panel. He was weighing his options. Arguing was dangerous. Agreeing meant stopping training. Staying silent was bad too. Rand would mistake silence for cowardice and start pushing harder. He chose the fourth option. He smiled. "All right, Uncle. I'll be quieter." Rand nodded. He stood up. He walked toward the gate. Halfway there, he turned around, and Kyle saw in his eyes not anger, pity. Rand pitied him just as much as the whole village did. Poor boy with zeros, playing the hero. He'll grow out of it soon. Kyle waited until his uncle was gone. Then he got up from the porch and did 30 squats, just to feel the numbers move. At night, he thought. The problem wasn't his uncle. The problem was the system. The whole world of Ere followed a single rule. You are equal to your numbers. If your potential said 47, that's exactly what you were worth. No more, no less. It was convenient, clear, like a grade in school, like a salary, like a rating. People love it when they can be measured. It takes the responsibility off them. If the ceiling says you're weak, then it's not your fault. That's just who you are. And if you're strong, then good for you. You just got lucky. No one asked the main question. What if the ceiling is lying? Not making a mistake, actually lying. Because a mistake means the system is imperfect, and a lie means the system is deliberate. And that is far more terrifying. On the morning of the 10th day, the first real event happened. Kyle found a cat. Not his own, a stray. A skinny gray cat was lying by the fence, breathing heavily. Its side was heaving unevenly. Its eyes were cloudy. It was dying. Any country boy would have walked right past. Stray cats died in Turin every month. No one kept count. Kyle crouched down beside it. He placed his palm on the cat's side, and again, nothing. The stranger's window didn't open, but he felt something else. Under his hand, the ribs moved unevenly. One side of the chest rose higher than the other. The breathing was asymmetrical. He carefully turned the cat over. It didn't resist. Too weak. The left side, the lower ribs, swelling. Not a fracture, more likely a bruise or inflammation. The cat couldn't breathe properly because one side of its chest hurt, and it was unconsciously limiting its intake of air. The lack of oxygen was weakening him. The weakness made him stop eating. Hunger weakened him even more. A vicious cycle. Kyle went into the house. He took a jar of dried leaves from his mother's shelf. He sniffed it. Mint. Not that. The second jar. The smell was bitter and earthy. He didn't know the local name for it, but the scent reminded him of arnica. In a past life, arnica had been a classic anti-inflammatory in folk medicine. He steeped a handful of leaves in warm water. He waited. He let it cool to body temperature. He returned to the cat. He carefully poured the infusion into its mouth. The cat flinched. It coughed, then licked again. Kyle sat down beside it and waited. 10 minutes later, the cat's breathing had evened out slightly. The left side was still lagging behind, but the difference had lessened. Kyle placed his hand on the cat's side and began to press gently, rhythmically, in time with its breathing, helping its chest expand. It wasn't even treatment. It was physical therapy, the simplest kind, straight out of a first-year textbook. He sat with the cat for an hour, then he left. He returned in the evening with food. The cat was lying in the same spot, but its eyes were clearer. It looked at Kyle and meowed. On the third day, the cat stood up. On the fifth, it started walking. On the seventh, it caught a mouse and brought it to the Varon family's doorstep. And that's exactly what became the problem. Because everyone had seen the cat. Bitten had seen Kyle sitting next to the dying cat. She'd seen him give it the herbal tea. She'd seen the cat come back to life. And Bitten told everyone. By the end of the second week, Kyle heard a word that made him go cold. Miracle worker. That's what old Mary from the far end of the village called him. A kid with a flaw in his eye healing without a doctor's license. It was dangerous. Not because people are evil, but because people talk, and words travel faster than people, especially words about miracles. The third week brought rain. For 5 days straight, water poured from the sky so heavily that the garden turned into a swamp. Kyle trained inside the house. Squats, push-ups, crunches. His mother watched and said nothing. She no longer asked why. She simply did her 3 exercises in the morning and evening as he had instructed. The back was getting better every day. She didn't talk about it, but Kyle could see. She was able to straighten up completely. She stopped clutching her lower back when she stood up. Once, he noticed her carrying a bucket of water from the well with one hand and not even wincing. A month ago, she couldn't lift that bucket with both hands. His own stats by the 20th day. Strength, 0.21. Dexterity, 0.16. Stamina, 0.22. Intelligence, 0.09. Perception, 0.06. Charisma, 0.01. Charisma had finally budged. He'd earned his first 100th while chatting with Bitta at the market, helping his mother sell herbs. Talking to people. That's what boosts charisma. He was slowly but surely heading toward a 1 in every stat. By his calculations, he'd reach a 1 in strength in 3 months, a 1 in dexterity in 4. For comparison, the starting strength of an ordinary village boy his age was around 2. An adult peasant had 5 or 6. A warrior like Uncle Rand had 28. Kyle was still half as strong as the average 7-year-old, but he was growing every day without stopping. On the 21st day, a woman he had never seen before knocked on their door. Young, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. She was holding the hand of a girl of about 5. The girl was pale and listless. The woman said she had come to see the herbalist. Sarah came out and began to ask questions. The girl hadn't eaten in 3 days. Her stomach hurt. A local doctor had said she had low physical potential and was naturally weak. He told them to wait. It might go away on its own, or it might not. Sarah shook her head. She took a dried root from the shelf. She began to explain how to brew it. Kyle stood in the doorway and looked at the girl. She was small, quiet. Her eyes were large and frightened. She was pressing her hand against her right side, not her stomach, her side, below her ribs, on the right. He went cold. In his past life, he hadn't been a doctor, but he remembered his first-year anatomy course. Pain in the lower right side, loss of appetite, lethargy, 3 days. It could be appendicitis. In a world without surgery, in a world where the doctor says to wait. He walked over to the girl. He crouched down in front of her. "Let me take a look." The girl pressed herself against her mother. The mother looked at Kyle, a 7-year-old boy with serious eyes. She hesitated. Sarah said quietly that Kyle knew a lot about these things. It was a lie, but the mother nodded. Kyle gently placed his hand on the girl's stomach, the right side. He pressed softly. The girl cried out. He removed his hand. The girl cried out again, louder, when he removed it. A rebound symptom. The pain intensifies when the pressure is released. It wasn't just a stomachache. It was an infection. Serious. He stood up and looked at the girl's mother. She needs a doctor, a real one, not a village doctor, from the city, today. The woman turned pale. "The city is a 3-hour walk away. She doesn't have money for a city doctor." Kyle turned to Sarah. "Mom, what herb reduces inflammation inside the body?" Sarah thought for a moment. She named 3 plants. Kyle didn't know their properties exactly, but one name sounded familiar. He asked her to show him. Sarah took a jar of small yellow flowers from the shelf. He sniffed it. Bitter, pungent. It's like chamomile but stronger. In the past world, chamomile was a mild anti-inflammatory. This one might be stronger. He brewed a handful, let it cool, gave the girl a sip. She grimaced, but drank it. Then he did something that surprised even him. He placed both palms on the girl's stomach, closed his eyes, and he concentrated. Not on the treatment. He didn't know how to treat her. He concentrated on the sensation, on what his hands were feeling. Warmth, a pulse, muscle tension. And suddenly, the panel flickered. Not his panel. Something new appeared at the edge of his vision. Dim, blurred, barely discernible. But he saw it. A single line. Body temperature 39.2. It wasn't another person's full window. It was a single parameter, a tiny fragment of someone else's data. He removed his hands. The line disappeared. He placed them back. The line returned. Body temperature 39.2. Right. A new ability. Or the beginning of a new ability. He couldn't see another person's window in its entirety, but he could pick up a single parameter through physical contact. The temperature confirmed his diagnosis. A serious infection. The girl needed help that the village couldn't provide. He did the only thing he could. He went to Uncle Rand. Rand was sitting on the porch of his house drinking ale. He saw Kyle and frowned. "Uncle, Marin's daughter is sick. She needs a city doctor, today." Rand looked at him. "I don't have money for other people's kids. If she doesn't see a doctor tomorrow, she might die." Rand set down his mug. "Where did you get that from?" Kyle looked him in the eye. "She has a fever and inflammation in her right side. It won't go away on its own." Rand was silent. He wasn't a bad man, harsh, narrow-minded, but not evil. He looked at the 7-year-old boy who spoke like a doctor and didn't blink. "How do you know?" "From the old man at the market." Rand snorted, but he stood up. An hour later, he was taking Marin and her daughter into town in a cart. Kyle stood by the gates and watched them go. His mother stood beside him. She didn't say a word, but he could feel her gaze, not anxious, not frightened, thoughtful. That evening, he sat alone in the garden and looked at the panel. Perception had jumped from 0.06 to 0.09. That flash, a foreign parameter, it had boosted his perception. So the ability is linked to perception. And that means the higher his perception, the more he'll be able to see in other people's windows. That changed everything. Until now, he'd thought only of himself, of his growth, of his numbers. Now he thought of others. If he could see other people's windows completely, if he could see all the details that no one else sees, then he'd be able to do for people that no healer or priest in Ernad can. He would be able to see what was really wrong with them. The girl returned 3 days later, alive. The town healer confirmed the inflammation and cured it with a healer class spell. The girl's mother came to Sarah and wept at the threshold. She said that the boy had saved her daughter, that the village doctor had told them to wait, but the boy had told them to go, and he had been right. Sarah hugged the woman. Then she looked at Kyle. And for the first time ever, not with anxiety or surprise, with pride. Quiet, restrained, but genuine. Kyle looked away, because if he had looked into her eyes for another second, he would have cried. And 24-year-old graduate students in biostatistics don't cry just because a stranger's mother looked at them with pride. Or maybe they do, but not in front of witnesses. The second month began with people starting to come to the Varon home, not in crowds, one at a time, quietly, looking around, as if they were ashamed. Old Mary was the first to arrive. Her hands ached. Her fingers were bent and wouldn't straighten. The local doctor said it was age and wear and tear, and there was nothing to be done about it. Kyle looked at her hands. He took them in his small palms. He concentrated. The pane of a stranger's window flashed at the edge of his vision. Dim, blurry, but he saw more than last time. 2 lines. Right hand joint temperature 37.8, finger mobility 12% of normal. 2 parameters instead of 1. His perception grew, and with it, the depth of his reading. He couldn't see the entire window, but he saw the symptoms. That was enough. Mary's fingers weren't just old. They were inflamed. Chronic joint inflammation. In the past world, it was called arthritis, and it wasn't treated with magic, but with movement, warmth, and proper exercise. He showed Mary 5 exercises for her fingers. Bend, straighten, squeeze a soft ball of cloth, roll a smooth pebble between her thumb and index finger, stretch each finger in turn. Mary looked at him as if he were a madman, but she did them, because she had no other options. 2 weeks later, Mary came back. She could bend her index finger all the way, for the first time in 3 years. She didn't cry. She just stood there and looked at her hand like someone who had witnessed a miracle. Then a second. Then a third. A shepherd's wife with a bad knee. A teenage boy with a hunched back whom the guild recruiter had rejected. A fisherman from the far edge of the village whose left hand had gone numb from an old injury. Kyle saw them one at a time on the porch, quietly, carefully. He didn't call himself a healer. He said he was just showing them exercises, that it wasn't magic or a cure, that he didn't have the healer class, that it was all their responsibility. He said this on purpose, because in Ernad, treating people without the healer class was against the law. A minor offense, but enough to attract attention. And exercises were just advice, like from a neighbor, legally insignificant. Sarah's mother watched this with growing anxiety. She became his shadow. She stood nearby when he talked to people. She walked them to the gate. She smiled. But in the evening, when they were alone, she would sit across from him and stare at him in silence for a long time. Once she asked, "Kyle, what happened to you in the temple?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You've changed. after the test, you were just a regular boy, but now you're different." He was silent. He thought about it every evening. What to tell his mother. He couldn't tell her the truth, that he was an adult from another world who had taken over the body of her dead son. That truth would kill her, more surely than any illness. He chose a middle ground. "Mom, when the priest announced the mistake, I felt something, as if I'd woken up, as if I'd been asleep before and now I'm not. I can't explain it any better, but I'm still me." She looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but she nodded. All right, my boy." She reached out and stroked his head. "My strange boy." There was a tenderness in her voice that made his chest ache, because he knew she wasn't stroking him. She was stroking the one who was no longer there, and he was accepting this affection on behalf of someone else, and he would accept it for the rest of his life. That was his real pain, not the zeros on the panel, not the hostile world, but the fact that he had taken the place of a dead child and had to pretend every day that he was that child in front of the woman who had loved that child more than life itself. At the end of the second month, what he feared most happened. A carriage pulled up to the Varon home, black with silver trim. A young man in the gray robes of a priest of the Temple of Numbers stepped out of the carriage, clean-shaven, with thin lips, with eyes that didn't smile even when he smiled. He introduced himself as Talmer, a third-rank inspector priest, sent from the district temple to conduct an inspection. Sarah turned pale. Kyle stood next to her and felt her hand clench painfully on his shoulder. He looked at Talmer. Young, about 25, ambitious, you could tell by his gait, by the way he surveyed the village, quickly, appraisingly, like an auctioneer. Talmer crouched down in front of Kyle. He smiled, an empty smile. "Hello, Kyle. I've been told you're an interesting boy. I came to look at your window. It's standard procedure. Don't be afraid." Kyle wasn't afraid. He was thinking, fast. If Talmer touched his forehead with the standard priestly ritual, he would see Kyle's window. All zeros. An error. It's already in the records. That's not dangerous. Something else is dangerous. If Talmer sees that the zeros have become something other than zeros, that the power is 0.4 and not 0, that the stats are rising without class and without potential, that's when the unanswerable questions would begin. He needed to hide the growth, hide the numbers, show the priest what the priest expected to see. Zeros and an error. He didn't know how to do it. He had no instructions, no skill. There was only the panel and the intuition of a graduate student who had worked with data his whole life. He looked at his panel. 6 lines of numbers and the word error at the bottom. He mentally reached for the panel, the way you reach for a screen to scroll. The panel didn't change. He tried something else. He imagined that the panel was a file, and he was the administrator, that the file had access levels, public and private. He imagined closing the file, setting a password, making it invisible to external readers. The panel flickered and changed. The numbers remained in place, but a thin gray film settled over them, like a filter, like a mask. And beneath the mask, the numbers became what they had been 2 months ago. Zeros. He didn't know how he'd done it, didn't know if he could do it again. But right now, his panel showed 2 layers, the real one for his eyes and the mask for everyone else. Talmer reached out, touched his forehead with 2 fingers, covered his eyes. A second later, he opened them. Kyle saw his face. Disappointment. The priest saw zeros and an error. Everything was just as in the records. Nothing new. Tolmer stood up. He smiled at Sarah. "Your son does indeed have a glitch in his window. Unfortunately, it's irreversible. He can lead a normal life, but don't expect anything more from him. I'll look into the rumors about a cure separately." He walked toward the carriage. He stopped halfway, turned around, and looked at Kyle. For a long time, intently, like a person who had seen the correct answer on a test, but felt the handwriting was someone else's. Then he got into the wagon and drove away. Kyle stood there watching him go. His mother's hand on his shoulder was trembling. "He's gone. My boy is gone." "Yes, Mom, he's gone." But Kyle knew. Tolmer had sensed something, not the numbers, something else. Maybe Kyle's reaction. Too calm for a 7-year-old standing before a priest. Maybe the smell of herbs in the house that didn't fit with their poverty. Maybe the glances from the neighbors who looked away too quickly. Tolmer was young and ambitious. People like that don't back down. They come back. That evening, Kyle sat on the porch and looked at the stars. Unfamiliar constellations. A foreign sky. 2 months in this world. Strength 0.43. Dexterity 0.34. Endurance 0.41. Intelligence 0.19. Perception 0.11. Charisma 0.04. Still nothing. Still less than any child in the village. But he was alive. His mother was healthy. The village was beginning to believe him. And he had learned to lie to his own window. Not bad for the first 2 months. Tolmer left, but he left silence behind. That particular village silence when people stop coming. For 3 days after the priest's visit, not a single person knocked on the Varanovs' door. Not Mary, not the shepherd's wife, not the fisherman. No one. The village froze. The silver-trimmed wagon frightened Taryn more than wolves in winter. Wolves come and go. The temple remembers. Kyle wasn't angry. He understood. In a world where your fate is recorded in a window, a priest is not a bureaucrat. A priest is a judge, an executioner, and a notary all rolled into one. He can make a mark in the registry. He can lower the village's priority for grain distribution. He can simply write a single word in a report. Suspicious. And that's enough. Sarah fell silent too. She stopped doing her exercises. She stopped going to the market. She sat at home and sorted through herbs in silence, just like before. Just like before that moment when her strange boy began to change her life. Kyle looked at her and felt something dark rising inside him. Not anger, colder than anger. A single visit from a single priest undid 2 months of work. Not his work, hers. Sarah had been working on herself for 2 months. She'd done her exercises through the pain. For the first time in years, she'd straightened up. For the first time, she'd smiled for real. And now she was sitting hunched over again, silent, because a man in a gray robe had come and said not to expect anything more from him. Kyle sat down next to his mother. "Mom?" She didn't turn around. "Mom, you're back." She said nothing. He placed his hand on her knee. "If you stop doing the exercises, the pain will return in a week." She turned. Her eyes were red. "So be it. Let it come back. Better a sore back than priests at the door." He looked at her and thought, she's right. From her point of view, she's absolutely right. Back pain is bad. But it's a familiar kind of bad. Priests are a terrifying, unpredictable kind of bad. and any normal person would choose the familiar pain. He couldn't tell her she was wrong, because she was right. Instead, he said something else. "Mom, you know how to make an ointment from the yellow root?" She looked at him. "I do." "Teach me." "Why?" "I want to learn." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She stood up. She took a root from the shelf and began to show him. That was his plan. Not to treat, not to help, not to draw attention. To learn, quietly, unobtrusively, like a child learns from his mother. It wouldn't arouse suspicion. It was normal, a boy helping his herbalist mother. What could be more ordinary? Kyle spent the next 4 weeks in the shadows. Literally, he trained only at night. When his mother fell asleep, he would go out to the garden and do his exercises in the dark. 2 hours every night. During the day, he helped Sarah. He gathered herbs. He learned to grind roots, to brew decoctions, to dry leaves. And every minute he worked with the herbs, his panel shifted. Intelligence grew from memorizing recipes. Perception grew from distinguishing scents. Dexterity grew from the delicate work of his fingers. He found a way to train without training. Working with herbs was training that looked like work. By the end of the 3rd month, his stats were strength 0.8, agility 0.7, stamina 0.9, intelligence 0.5, perception 0.3, charisma 0.06. Strength almost a unit. 2 more weeks, he could already lift a bucket of water without straining. He could run to the forest and back without getting out of breath. He could pull himself up on a branch. Once. Pathetic. Shaky. But the first. To the world of Ernad, it was nothing. To him, it was proof. The formula works. Growth doesn't stop. The curve is going up. On the 92nd day, what he had been waiting for happened. He was sitting by the stream, washing the jars for herbs. His mother was at home. No one else was around. He dipped his hands in the water and froze. The panel opened on its own. Not his usual 6 lines. Below, a new section appeared under the main specifications, like a drop-down menu that had previously been collapsed. The heading read, Sub-Parameters. He stopped breathing. Below the heading was a list, a long one. Finger coordination, 0.4. Olfactory memory, 0. 3. Pain tolerance, 0.2. Ligament healing speed, 0.1. Sense of balance, 0.3. Night vision acuity, 0.2. Throwing accuracy, 0.1. More. He counted 34 lines before the list ended. 34 hidden parameters that no one had seen. Not even the priests. Not the people themselves. These parameters existed for every resident of Ernad, but the panel showed only the top 6. As if a person had a complete medical record, but the doctor read only the first page. He slowly stepped out of the stream, sat down on the bank. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from understanding. That's why his mother was gasping in pain despite having normal physical strength. Because the elasticity of the back muscles is a sub-parameter. It's not in the top 6. No one looks at it. That's why Mary couldn't straighten her fingers. Joint mobility is a sub-parameter. That's why the doctor says, "Such is fate," and throws up his hands. Because the doctor sees only the top 6, and if everything's normal there, then the patient is healthy. And the patient is screaming in pain. All of Ernad's medicine was built on 6 numbers, as if a cardiologist were making a diagnosis based solely on height and weight. Kyle sat on the shore and looked at his 34 lines. 34 levers that no one had ever touched. 34 ways to help people without breaking a single law. Because sub-parameters didn't exist in ERNAD's legal framework. They aren't in the registry, they aren't in the textbooks, they aren't in the laws. You can't break a law about something that doesn't exist. He went home. Sarah was sitting at the table. He walked over to her. "Mom, can I take your hand?" She held out her hand without asking. Trust. Blind and absolute. It made his chest ache again. He took her palm in his. He closed his eyes. He concentrated. Before, he had seen one or two of another person's parameters through touch. Now that his own panel had revealed sub-parameters, he hoped to see more. The panel flashed. A gray haze of another person's window appeared at the edge of his vision. 3 lines. 5. 7. They appeared slowly, like a photograph developing in a solution. He saw 12 of his mother's parameters before the image began to fade. 12 out of a possible 30-odd. But among them was that very line. Back muscle elasticity, 0.4. He opened his eyes. His mother looked at him questioningly. He smiled. "Mom, I want to show you 3 new exercises." 3 months and 1 week. Strength had surpassed 1. Kyle stood in the garden at 4 in the morning staring at the panel. Strength 1.02. 1.02. 3 months of daily training for a number that any country boy had at birth. He didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. A strength rating of 1 meant he could lift a full bucket. He could run a kilometer. He could push a heavy door open with one hand. Things that were normal for any child. For him, they had become an achievement. But the curve was going up, without breaks, without slowing down. Every day plus 0.01 to strength. Every day plus 0.08 in agility. Every day, without exception. He now knew the exact coefficients. He knew which exercise yielded the maximum gain in which characteristic. He knew that squats with a stone weight in his hands yielded 20% more than regular ones. He knew that running uphill was 30% more effective than running on flat ground by 30%. He knew that reading an unfamiliar text yields more intellectual gain than rereading a familiar one. He had a table in his head. Complete, precise, up to date. Like a training log. Only in this world, no one kept training logs. People trained until they dropped every day because they believed that perseverance was the path to their potential. They didn't count reps. They didn't track progress. They didn't take rest days. They just hammered away at the same thing until their bodies gave out or until they hit their limit. It was as if a runner ran a marathon every day without warming up and was surprised that his knees were falling apart. Kyle ran every other day. He varied his workload. He slept at least 8 hours. He ate whatever he could find. And he grew. Slowly, steadily, without injuries, without setbacks. Like a turtle. On the 100th day, Emma Carr came to the Varon house, red-haired, freckled, skinny, with scraped knees and an expression that said she was ready to fight anyone who said a word to her. She was 7 years old, just like Kyle. They lived on neighboring streets but had hardly spoken until that day. Kyle knew a little about her. Water mage class, magic potential 11. Low. Very low. For a mage, that's a death sentence. 11 meant she would never rise above first circle spells. She wouldn't get into the academy. She wouldn't get a spot in the guild. Her parents were already negotiating an early marriage with the miller's son from the neighboring village. The boy was 12. Emma was 7. In 3 years, when she turned 10, the marriage would be finalized. That's how the system worked. Low potential meant low value. Low value meant an early marriage. An early marriage meant children by 14. Children by 14 meant the end. Emma stood by the gate and looked at him from under her eyelids. "You're that boy with the defect." Kyle nodded. "They say you heal." Kyle remained silent. "I don't need healing. I'm not sick. I just want to be stronger. Teach me." He looked at her. 7 years old, scraped knees, a stubborn gaze, and behind that gaze, fear. Not a child's fear, an adult's. The fear of a person who sees their destiny and doesn't want to step into it. "Come in." She went in, sat down on the porch, tucked her legs under her. He sat down next to her. "Show me your hand." She held out her hand, small, dirty, with hangnails. He took her palm, closed his eyes. The pane of a stranger's window began to appear, dim, slow. But he already knew how to wait. The lines appeared one after another. Physical strength, 2.1 out of 8. Agility, 3.4 out of 12. Water magic, 1.8 out of 11. The standard top 6. Nothing interesting. Then came the sub-parameters. Breathing coordination, 0.6. Reaction speed, 1.2. Temperature sensitivity, 0.8. Cold tolerance, 1.4. And suddenly, one line, bright, almost glowing against the rest. Water resonance, 4.7. No upper limit. He opened his eyes. Emma looked at him warily. "What's wrong? Why are you frozen like that?" He looked at her and thought. Water resonance. A subparameter that isn't in a single textbook. With a value of 4.7, which is orders of magnitude higher than all her other readings, and with no upper limit. Just like his. Not a mistake, not a glitch. A hidden talent, buried so deep that no priest will ever see it. Because priests don't look at subparameters. Because subparameters don't exist. He let go of her hand. "Emma, what do you feel when it rains?" She looked at him as if he were crazy. "Wet." "No, not on the skin. Inside. What do you feel inside when water is nearby?" She thought for a moment. For the first time during the conversation, she really thought about it. "I don't know. Warm. Like the water is talking." "That's silly." He shook his head. "It's not silly. It's more important than all your magical potential." He started simple, asked her to sit by the stream, close her eyes, put her hands in the water, and listen. Not with her ears, with her whole body. She sat there for 5 minutes, 10, 15. Nothing happened. Kyle waited. At the 20-minute mark, the water around her hands began to move. Not from the wind, not from the current. It moved in a circle, slowly, as if it were breathing. Emma opened her eyes. She looked at the water, then at Kyle, then back at the water. "I'm doing this." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Yes. She pulled her hands out of the stream. The water kept moving for another 3 seconds. Then it stopped. Emma sat there in silence. Kyle saw her lips trembling. Not from the cold. She was trying not to cry. A 7-year-old girl who had been told she looked 11 and nothing more, who in 3 years would be given away to the miller, who fought with the boys every day because if you didn't fight, it meant you'd given up. This girl had just realized she could do something no one had taught her, that water obeyed her without spells, without gestures, without formulas. simply because she asked. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Come tomorrow." She nodded, stood up, wiped her face with her sleeve, walked toward the gate. Halfway there, she turned around. "Don't tell anyone. No one." She left. He remained sitting on the shore. He looked at the water. He thought. The resonance of water. The ability to sense water in living organisms. If she developed this, if she brought it to a level where Emma could sense every drop of water in the human body, she would become a diagnostician, a living tomograph. She would be able to find inflammation, tumors, bleeding, ruptures, anything that contains water. And water makes up 70% of the human body. She won't be a warrior mage, she'll be a healer mage, the first in the history of Ernod. And no magic potential of 11 will stand in the way of that. Because the resonance of water isn't magic as this world understands it. It's a subparameter. It isn't in the textbooks. It isn't in the registry. It isn't in the laws. He smiled, for the second time that day. Emma came every day. In the morning before her mother sent her off to lessons with the village teacher, and in the evening after dinner. She would sit by the stream, close her eyes. She put her hands in the water and listened. The first week, nothing new happened. The water swirled around her hands, slowly, hesitantly, as if tasting it. In the second week, Emma learned to move the water without touching it. She held her hand over the stream, and the surface bent in response to her palm, like a magnet over iron filings. In the third week, she said a phrase that sent a chill down Kyle's spine. "Kyle, I can feel a frog on the other bank. Inside it, water is running in circles, fast, fast." She could feel the blood flow of the frog 4 meters away, through the earth, through the grass, without seeing, without hearing. Feeling. Resonance. Kyle asked her to focus, to describe it in more detail. She furrowed her brow. "Small. The water flows in 2 circles, one big, one small. The big circle is warm. The small one is colder." 2 circulatory systems, big and small. She was describing a frog's anatomy without knowing the word anatomy. She was 7 years old and could see the circulatory system right through 4 meters of earth. Kyle sat down on the grass. He needed a minute. 1 minute to grasp the scale of it. Emma Carr's magical potential was 11. The priests recorded it in the registry. Her parents began haggling with the miller. The world decided she was worth 11, and not a single point more. And she could sense the frog's blood through 4 meters of soil. They were all looking the wrong way. Everyone, without exception, the whole world. He began training her systematically. In the morning, physical exercises to develop control. Standing on one leg with eyes closed. Walking on a log. Throwing pebbles at a target with her left hand. This honed her coordination and balance, subparameters that supported the core skill. In the evening, work with water. First, a stream, then a cup in the house, then a drop on her palm. He reduced the volume of water she worked with because precision is more important than volume. Any water mage could raise a wave. That's brute force. Brute force is measured by potential. But to sense a single drop of blood in a vessel, that's not strength. That's sensitivity. And Emma's sensitivity was off the charts. Meanwhile, Kyle continued his routine. Nighttime training, daytime work with herbs, reading everything he could find. There were no books in the Varon house, but the village elder had a shelf with 3 books. The village teacher had 4. Rand had 1, an old handbook on combat techniques. Kyle read them all. Every new book gave him a boost in intelligence. Every new herbal recipe gave him a boost in perception. Every conversation with the villagers gave him a tiny boost in charisma. By the 4th month, his stats were Strength 1.4, Agility 1.1, Stamina 1.5, Intelligence 0.8, Perception 0.5, Charisma 0.1. He was at the level of an average 5-year-old. At 7 years old. It was a shame. But the curve was going up, and he knew that in a year, he'd be at the level of a 10-year-old. In 2 years, at the level of a teenager. In 5, at the level of an adult warrior. And that was just the beginning. On the 120th day, a letter arrived. Not for him, for the village elder. A messenger brought a scroll from the district town. Kyle found out about it from Bitten, who had started visiting Sarah again. Priest Inspector Tolmer had submitted a request for a re-inspection of the village of Terran, an official one, with the seal of the district temple. He hadn't forgotten. Kyle sat on the porch and did the math. If the re-inspection followed standard procedure, Tolmer would touch his forehead and see the mask. 0 chance. Just like last time. But if Tolmer brought a senior priest with him, someone of higher rank and with a more refined perception, the mask might not hold up. He didn't know how durable his disguise was, didn't know what it depended on, didn't know if it could be strengthened. He only knew that it had worked once, and that relying on a single observation is a crime in statistics. He needed a plan. Not an escape plan. There was nowhere to run. The village was his whole world. His mother wouldn't survive the move. Emma was just starting to grow up. He needed a plan of defense. Something that would make his inspection pointless, or impossible, or unnecessary. He thought for 3 days. On the 4th, he went to Rand. His uncle was sitting on the porch, as always, with a mug, with a heavy look. "Uncle, I need your help." Rand looked at him, silently. "I know the priest will return. I need you to write a petition to the District Warriors Guild to enroll me as an apprentice." Rand set down his mug. "You've lost your mind. You're in the wrong class. They won't accept you." "I know, but they'll register the petition. And while it's under review, my status will fall under the guild's jurisdiction, not the temple's." Rand looked at him for a long time. "How do you know about jurisdiction?" "I read a lot." It was true. The handbook on martial arts that Kyle had found at Rand's place contained an appendix with the guild's charter, including a clause stating that any candidate for membership is under the guild's protection while their application is being reviewed. It was a loophole, a small one, a temporary one, but enough to buy a few months. Rand finished his ale, set down the mug, stood up. "You're a strange boy, Kyle. You're a damn strange boy." But he went into the house to get some paper. The application left with the trade caravan the next day. Kyle knew the review would take 2 to 4 months. During that time, he needed to become strong enough to pass at least the guild's formal test, the minimum threshold for an apprentice. Strength 3, Dexterity 2, Stamina 3. He had a 1.5 in strength. He needed to double his stats in 4 months. Before, this had seemed impossible. But now he knew something new. Sub-parameters. If he trained not just the 6 main stats, but specifically developed the sub-parameters that support them, his growth could accelerate. Not because the formula would change, but because his body would become more efficient. Finger coordination doesn't directly affect strength, but it affects the quality of his grip. The quality of the grip affects the effectiveness of pull-ups. The effectiveness of pull-ups affects strength gains per repetition. A chain. Long, indirect, but real. He began training the sub-parameters. Finger coordination through rope braiding. Sense of balance through standing on one leg. Pain tolerance through ice-cold water in the mornings. Ligament healing speed through alternating load and rest. Each sub-parameter was a lever. Each lever moved the main characteristic just a little faster. Individually, the effect was negligible, but 34 levers together yielded a gain of 40% more than just squats. He checked, he calculated, he double-checked. 40%. The difference between someone who trains the body and someone who trains the system. On the 130th day, he did 5 pull-ups in a row for the first time. His mother stood by the window and watched. He could see her shadow. She didn't come out. She didn't interfere. She just stood there watching her strange boy, who grew a little stronger every day. And for the first time, he noticed she was smiling. The 5th month. Summer in Terran smelled of warm earth and cut grass. Kyle woke up at 3 in the morning. He woke until 5. He washed in the stream. He helped his mother until noon. He trained with Emma until sunset. He read until dark. He fell asleep at 9. Every day the same. Every day a little more than yesterday. His stats on the 150th day. Strength, 2.1. Agility, 1.7. Stamina, 2. 3. Intelligence, 1.2. Perception, 0.8. Charisma, 0.2. He was close to the guild's minimum threshold. Strength 3 in 2 months at his current rate. Agility 2 in a month and a half. Stamina was almost there. He was making it. Barely. But he was making it. Emma was growing faster than he expected. Her water resonance had risen from 4.7 to 8.3 in 2 months of training. She could sense a person from 10 meters away, not just a presence. She could detect a pulse, a temperature, the place where the blood flows faster, the place where it's slower. Once, she said, "Something's wrong inside Bitten, top right. The water there is hotter than everywhere else." Kyle asked her to clarify. Top right, where exactly? Emma pointed to her own body. Under the ribs, on the right, the liver, or the gallbladder. Hot means inflammation. Kyle went to see Bitten. He brought her a decoction. He said his mother had advised her to drink it 3 times a day. He didn't say why. Bitten drank it. A week later, she told Sarah that the strange feeling of heaviness in her side that had tormented her for 6 months was gone. She didn't know that she had been cured by a 7-year-old red-headed girl with an 11-level potential. That became their method. Emma found the ailments. Kyle diagnosed them. Sarah prepared the decoctions. 3 people, a herbalist, a boy with a flaw, a girl with low potential. 3 rejects by Ernad's standards, and they did what no doctor in the area could. Her mother knew. Not everything, but enough. She saw that Emma came every day. She saw that Kyle whispered with her by the stream. She saw that after their conversations, Kyle would come and ask for a specific herb for a specific person. One evening, she sat down next to Kyle and said quietly, "You're teaching her something." Kyle nodded. "What?" "To see what others don't see." Sarah was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Be careful. She's just a little girl. If something happens to her because of you—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Kyle understood. He bore responsibility, not just for himself, for Emma, for his mother. for every person he'd touched and whose window he'd peered into. Because knowledge is responsibility, and in a world where knowledge is forbidden, responsibility becomes a danger. On the 160th day, a stranger arrived in Terran. Not a priest, not an official, a knight. A tall man in worn leather armor with a coat of arms on his shoulder. 2 crossed swords on a blue field. The coat of arms of Duke Voen. The knight rode into the village on a weary horse. He dismounted by the well. He watered his horse. He looked around. He asked the first person he met where the herbalist Varen lived. The first person he met turned out to be Uncle Rand. Rand led the knight to the Varen house himself. Kyle watched them from the window. Rand walked beside the knight and looked both alarmed and flattered. A knight from the Duke's household in his village. That was an event. That was status. The knight entered the yard. Kyle stepped out onto the porch. His mother stood behind him. The knight looked at the boy, at his mother, at the house with the leaky roof, at the bush with white berries. His face was expressionless, the professional detachment of a soldier. "My name is Eric Tan. I serve House Voen. I have been tasked with finding a herbalist or a healer who can help with an unusual illness. I was told in the county town that there is someone in this village with unconventional methods." Kyle listened. His mother trembled behind him. He could feel her hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. "The illness affects the Duke's heiress, an 11-year-old girl. She has been growing weaker for 3 years now. The kingdom's best physicians cannot diagnose her. Her physical potential is normal. Her vital signs are normal. But her body is failing. Her muscles are weakening. Her hands are trembling. Her legs won't hold her up." Eric spoke evenly, without emotion. But Kyle saw his hands. They clenched into fists with every word about the girl. This knight knew her personally, and he cared. The Duke is willing to pay any price. Kyle remained silent. He was calculating. Symptoms: muscle weakness with normal vital signs, tremors, progressive deterioration, normal physical potential, normal baseline characteristics. This wasn't typical weakness. It was a nervous system disorder. The muscles were fine. The nerves controlling them were not. In the old world, this was called myasthenia, or something from that group. A disruption in signal transmission from the nerve to the muscle. The doctors of Ernad didn't see it because nerve conduction wasn't reflected in the top 6 characteristics. It was a sub-parameter, hidden, invisible, non-existent from the perspective of local medicine. Kyle looked at his mother. She shook her head. "Barely noticeable. No, don't go. Don't get involved. It's the Duke's house. If you don't help, they'll punish you. If you do help, they'll take you away." She was right, and she was wrong. The truth is that it's dangerous. The untruth was that he had a choice. An 11-year-old girl was dying of a disease he could likely diagnose at a glance. He could have kept quiet, could have said he was just a boy with a flaw and couldn't help, could have hidden behind his zeros and moved on. He could have. But Daniel So couldn't just walk past the data. It was stronger than caution, stronger than fear. A biostatistician sees a pattern and can't help but name it. It's a professional quirk. It's a disease. It's the only disease he brought with him from the past world. He turned to Eric. "I'll go with you." His mother behind him sighed quietly, like someone who knew this moment would come and yet wasn't ready for it. Kyle turned around. He looked her in the eyes. "Mom, I'll be back." She nodded. Her eyes were dry. Her back was straight. She no longer slumped. She stood upright and looked at her strange boy who was about to leave to treat the Duke's daughter. And in that moment, he saw that her chin was slightly raised. Not out of pride, out of resolve. She wasn't crying. She was letting him go. Emma was standing by the gate. He hadn't noticed when she'd arrived. "You're leaving." For a while. She narrowed her eyes. "If you don't come back, I'll come after you and give you a good smack on the neck." He smiled. For the first time in a long time, a real smile. "It's a deal." Eric watched them. The 7-year-old boy who spoke like an adult. The little girl who was shaking her fist at him. At the mother standing in the doorway, not crying. A strange village. Strange people. He mounted his horse. Kyle climbed onto the wagon Eric had brought with him. The wheels creaked. Taryn stayed behind. Ahead lay the road. 3 days' journey to the Vaughan estate. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to remember everything he knew about myasthenia from his past life. The journey to the Vaughan estate took 3 days. Kyle spent them in the wagon on bales of hay. Eric rode alongside on horseback. They hardly spoke. Eric was the kind of person who considered silence a form of respect. Kyle was the kind of person who used silence to work. He worked. For 3 days straight, he trained in the wagon. Not physically, mentally. He closed his eyes and went through the sub-parameters, his own, from memory, each of the 34. He imagined each as a separate scale. He concentrated on each scale for 10 seconds, then moved on to the next. It was an exercise in perception, in attention control, in the ability to see his own panel not as a whole, but in parts. By the end of the 3rd day, his perception had risen from 0.8 to 0.9, a small increase, but it meant that the mental exercises were working, that he didn't need a garden or a stream or the darkness of night. He could grow anywhere, at any time, even lying on sacks of hay. The Vaughan estate appeared on the horizon on the evening of the 3rd day. Gray walls, 4 towers, a moat filled with water, banners bearing the coat of arms, 2 crossed swords on a blue field. Kyle had never seen anything like it. Taryn was a village of 20 houses. The Vaughan estate was a fortress. Guards stood at the gates. Eric gave a signal and they were let through. The inner courtyard, stables, a smithy, barracks, men in armor and men in livery, servants and grooms, a whole world within the walls. Eric dismounted. He walked over to the wagon. He held out his hand. Kyle jumped down on his own. Eric looked at him. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Approval, or surprise, or both. They were expected. In the manor's hall stood a man of about 45, tall, lean, with silver at his temples and wrinkles around his eyes, the kind found on people who are used to gazing into the distance. Duke Matthias Vaughan. Standing beside him was a woman in a dark dress. Her face was calm, her hands were folded, her eyes were Duchess Wren Vaughan, Adeline's mother. The Duke looked at Kyle. Kyle saw his mouth twitch. Barely noticeable. Disappointment. The Duke had expected an adult, a bearded healer, a shaman, a sage. Instead, he got a 7-year-old boy with scraped knees dressed in coarse cloth. Eric. I asked for a healer. Eric stood at attention. My lord, people in the region speak of him. He heals those whom doctors have given up on. I checked. 3 cases in the last 2 months, all confirmed. The Duke was silent. The Duchess was silent. Kyle stood before them and felt their gazes. Heavy, appraising, full of hope they were trying to hide, because hope, for the parents of a sick child, is the most dangerous thing there is. It kills more slowly than the disease, but more surely. He said, I would like to see your daughter. The Duke looked at him for another 5 seconds. Then he nodded. Adeline's room was on the 2nd floor, bright, large, with tall windows, with bookshelves lining the walls, with a bed in which the girl lay. Kyle entered and immediately looked at the books. Shelves full. Dozens of volumes. The girl who couldn't walk read. A lot. Adeline Vaughn, 11 years old, pale to the point of being blue, dark hair scattered across the pillow, slender arms resting on top of the blanket, eyes open, clear, attentive, intelligent. Not the eyes of a sick child, the eyes of someone who is observing. She looked at Kyle. He looked at her. The silence lasted 3 seconds. You're too small to be a doctor, he replied. You're too pale to be a duchess. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. The Duke behind Kyle tensed. The Duchess clenched her hands. Eric stepped forward, but Adeline raised her hand slightly, a stopping gesture, small, but all three froze. This girl was controlling the room without getting out of bed. Come here. He approached, sat on the edge of the bed. She held out her hand. He took it, slender, cold, with fingers that barely closed. And he closed his eyes. The frame of a stranger's window began to emerge, slower than usual, as if something were getting in the way. Adeline's body was more complex than the villagers, more parameters, more data, more noise. He waited, breathed evenly, concentrated. The lines appeared one after another. Physical strength, 3, 2 out of 28. Agility, 2.8 out of 24. Magic, 0 out of 0. Endurance, 4.1 out of 31. High potential, very high, but current values are low, disproportionately low. A girl with a strength potential of 28 had a current strength of 3.2, like a 5-year-old peasant child. He dug deeper. Subparameters. Gross motor coordination 0.9, should be at least 4 for her age. Nerve impulse speed 0.3, critically low. Nerve transmission in the limbs 0.2, almost 0. There it was. He saw it, clear, crisp, like a table on a screen. Adeline's basic stats were fine, high potential, physically healthy muscles. But the nervous system controlling those muscles was operating at 20% capacity. The signal from the brain to the hand traveled 5 times slower than it should. The muscle received the command to contract, but the command arrived weak and delayed. That's why her hands were shaking. That's why her legs wouldn't hold her up. That's why the body, which according to all 6 top parameters was healthy, was slowly dying. Ernad's doctors saw the top 6. The top 6 were normal, so the patient was healthy. Yet the patient couldn't get out of bed. Kyle opened his eyes. Adeline was looking at him, calmly, without hope. She had long since stopped hoping. Too many doctors, too many disappointments. He said, I know what's wrong with you. Silence. The Duke behind her stopped breathing. The Duchess pressed her hand to her mouth. Adeline didn't move. Your muscles are healthy. Your body is healthy. It's not your body that's sick. It's your nerves. They aren't sending signals to your muscles. As if the bell were intact, but the rope from the clapper had frayed. The bell is in place. The clapper is in place. But there's nothing to strike it with. Adeline looked at him. Something had changed in her eyes. Not hope. Not hope yet. Attention. Sharp. Intensive. like that of a scientist who has heard a hypothesis for the first time that matches the data. Go on. This can't be cured by doctors' spells, because spells work on what's visible in the window, and what's ailing you isn't visible in the window. It's hidden deeper. The Duke took a step forward. He wasn't breathing either. You can cure this. Kyle turned to him. I'm not a healer. I don't know how to heal with spells, but I can show her exercises that will make her nerves work again. It will take a long time. It will be painful, and it will require more discipline from her than from any warrior in your castle. He turned back to Adeline. She was still looking at him, silent. Then she said, Pain, I know how to handle. Discipline, I know how to handle. Long, I'm used to it. When do we start? Now. He began that very evening. The first exercise was simple. Clench the fingers of her right hand. Unclench. Clench. Unclench. 10 times. Adeline clenched her fingers, or tried to. 3 fingers bent. 2 wouldn't obey. She tried again. 2 bent. 3 didn't. On the third try, she clenched all 5. Weakly, for a second, but all 5. Kyle looked at her window through touch. Nerve transmission in the limbs. 0.2 became 0.21, 1/100th, from 10 finger clenches. He nodded. 10 more. She clenched and unclenched her fingers until she fell asleep right in the middle of the exercise. Her hand fell onto the blanket. Her breathing became steady. Kyle quietly stood up. He left the room. The Duke and Duchess were standing in the hallway. They hadn't left. They had been waiting behind the door the whole time. The Duchess was crying silently. The Duke stood upright, but his hands were trembling. How long? Kyle looked at him. Months, maybe a year, maybe longer. I can't promise a complete cure. I can promise she'll get better. The Duke looked at the 7-year-old boy from the village with the leaky roof and nodded. You will be provided with everything you need, Kyle thought. I need books. Every book on the human body in your library. And I need no one to tell the temple that I'm here and what I'm doing. The Duke straightened up. The temple does not enter my house uninvited. It was said quietly, but behind those words stood a wall, a stone wall, with 4 towers, with a moat, with a coat of arms borne by generations of knights. For the first time in 5 months in Ernod, Kyle felt safe. Temporary, fragile, but safe. The Voan estate became his laboratory. The Duke kept his word. Kyle was given a room next to Adeline's quarters, small, clean, with a bed, a table, and a chair. After the floor by the stove in Turin, this felt like a palace. But the most important thing was the books. The Voan library occupied an entire hall on the first floor. Hundreds of volumes. Herbals, treatises on magic, histories of wars, class descriptions, registers of potentials, textbooks for academies. Kyle read for 6 hours a day. His intellect grew like never before. In his first week at the estate, it jumped from 1.2 to 1.8. New texts, complex texts, texts that made him think. This yielded 3 times the growth compared to rereading the same old village books. He wrote this down. The novelty of information affects the rate of intellectual growth. Repetition yields less. Therefore, for maximum growth, a constant stream of new material is needed. Another law of the system. Another lever. Adeline trained every day. In the morning, she clenched and unclenched her fingers, 50 repetitions for each hand. In the afternoon, she tried to raise her arms above her head. In the evening, she wiggled her toes. At night, she lay awake and hated her body. Kyle saw it. He saw the dark circles under her eyes. He saw how she clenched her teeth with every repetition. He saw how, after her exercises, she turned her back to the wall and breathed raggedly. Not from pain, from helplessness. She was used to pain. She wasn't used to slowness. Adeline Vaughn had been preparing to rule since she was 3. She read faster than any child in the duchy. She could calculate 3-digit numbers in her head. She knew the laws. She knew etiquette. She knew the genealogy of every noble house. Her mind was sharp and quick, but her body was a prison. And Kyle came and said it would take months, maybe a year. On the 10th day, she snapped. He walked in that morning and saw that a cup of water had been smashed against the wall. Adeline was sitting on the bed. Her face was pale. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were on her knees. They weren't trembling, because she didn't even have the strength to tremble. "I don't feel any difference." Kyle sat down on a chair, silently. 10 days, 500 repetitions, and I don't feel a thing. He looked at her panel through touch. Nerve conduction in the limbs went from 0.2 to 0.34, 14 hundredths in 10 days. He turned his palm toward her. "You don't feel the difference because the difference is small, but it's there. 2 days ago, you clenched all 5 fingers on the 3rd try. Today, on the 1st. Yesterday, you raised your arm 10 degrees higher than a week ago. You don't notice because you're looking at the result, but you need to look at the process." She was silent. He continued, "You've read all the books on these shelves." She nodded. "You didn't read them in a single day." She didn't answer, but he could see she understood. Adeline Vaughn was smart enough to grasp the analogy, proud enough not to admit it out loud. He stood up. "Today's a new exercise. Stand up." She looked at him. "I can't stand." "You couldn't stand 10 days ago. Try now." She tried. She grabbed the edge of the bed. She tensed. Her feet touched the floor. Her body rose. 2 centimeters. 3. She was standing. Her knees were shaking. Her hands had turned white from gripping the edge, but she was standing. 3 seconds. Then she fell back onto the bed. Her breathing was ragged. Her face was wet with sweat, but her eyes were different. 3 seconds. Kyle nodded. "Tomorrow, 4. She looked at him, and for the first time in 10 days, her lips twitched. Not a smile, the shadow of a smile, the promise of a smile. In the 3rd week at the estate, Kyle received a letter from Taryn. His mother had written it, not herself. She couldn't write. Bitten had written it under her dictation, clumsy letters on a scrap of cloth. "Son, we're doing well. Emma comes every day and helps me with the herbs. Uncle Rand received a reply from the guild. Your petition has been accepted for review. The priest hasn't come by anymore. I miss you, Mom." Kyle read and reread it 3 times. Then he folded the cloth and put it in his pocket. The petition has been accepted. That means the guild's protection is working. Talmer can't touch him while the review is underway. Emma is helping Sarah. Good. Emma isn't wasting any time. She's probably training by the stream. She's surely growing. In the 4th week, Adeline stood up. For real. For 10 seconds, without using her hands. The Duchess, who had been standing in the doorway, went out into the hallway, and Kyle could hear her crying. Not out of grief. Her daughter was standing, for the first time in a year and a half. 10 seconds. In the 5th week, Adeline took a step. 1. With her left foot. She pulled her right foot up. Kyle stood nearby, ready to catch her if she fell. She didn't fall. She took a step and stopped and looked down at him, because she was 4 years older and a head taller, and in her eyes was something he'd seen before, in her mother, in Mary, in the fisherman with the numb hand, but stronger, brighter, more painful. Gratitude that couldn't be put into words. She said quietly, "I'll remember this." He didn't ask what exactly. He knew. She would remember that the boy with the mistake in the window had given her what the kingdom's best doctors couldn't. A step. One step. In the 6th week, the Duke summoned him to his office. A large room, maps on the walls, a dark wood desk. The Duke sat at the desk and looked at Kyle for a long time. "You're not who you seem to be." Kyle was silent. "You're 7 years old. You speak like an adult. You know things that no doctor in my duchy knows. You treat my daughter with methods no one has ever heard of. Who are you?" "I am Kyle Varon, the son of an herbalist from Terran." The Duke shook his head. "That's a name. I'm asking who you are." Kyle looked at him. What to say? "I can't tell the truth. Lies are dangerous." Duke Voen was no country bumpkin. You couldn't fool him with a story about an old man at the market. He chose a third path. "I am the one who sees what others cannot. I don't know why. I don't know how. But I see in people what lies hidden beneath the surface, and I know what to do with it." It wasn't a lie. It was the truth. Incomplete, but the truth. The Duke looked at him for another 10 seconds. Then he nodded. "All right, that's enough for me. I won't ask again. But you need to know one thing. The Temple of Numbers already knows you're here." Kyle went cold. "How?" "The servants are talking. The cooks are talking. The guards are talking. A boy from the village is healing the heiress of Voen. This news reached the district temple 3 days ago." Kyle was silent. He was thinking. If the temple knows, then Talmer knows. If Talmer knows, then he'll report it up the chain. The district temple, the regional temple, the capital temple. The chain. Long, but inevitable. "I have a proposal." The Duke stood up. He walked over to the map on the wall. He pointed to a spot. "In 4 months, enrollment for the Royal Academy of Numbers begins in the capital. Any resident of the kingdom can submit an application. If you enroll in the academy, you'll receive a status that the temple cannot challenge. An academy student is inviolable for the duration of their studies. This isn't a loophole. It's the law." Kyle looked at the map. The capital. The academy. 4 months. "But I'm in the wrong class. They won't accept me." The Duke turned to him. "Admission to the academy is based on the results of the entrance exam, not on class, not on potential, on results. If you show what you're capable of here, your class won't matter." He paused. "I'll write a letter of recommendation. The name Voen means something in this kingdom." Kyle stood in front of the map. 4 months. 4 months to get Adeline to a point where she can continue without him. 4 months to raise his stats to a level where he won't disgrace himself on the entrance exam. 4 months to prepare for a world where his zeros and his mistake will be visible not just to a village of 20 houses, but to the entire kingdom. He looked at the Duke. "I agree. 4 months until the entrance exam." Kyle divided the time in half. 2 months at the Voen estate, 2 months in Terrain. At the estate, he worked with Adeline and read. In the Voen library, he found books that weren't available anywhere in the village. A treatise on anatomy written by a 3rd-generation physician. a reference book on the theory of magical currents, a history of the Temple of Numbers over the last 300 years, and most importantly, an old book without a cover found in a dusty corner of the bottom shelf. It was titled Notes on Classes, author unknown. The book was handwritten in small script. Half the pages were ruined by dampness, but on the surviving pages was written something that took Kyle's breath away. The author described 42 classes, not 40 as in the official registry, 42. The 2 extra classes had no names. Instead, there was a symbol, a crossed-out circle, and next to it, a note. Removed from the registry by decision of the Temple Council in the year 412 from the founding. Reason? Threat to the stability of the system. Kyle reread the paragraph 4 times. The year 412. It was now the year 1074. More than 600 years ago, 2 classes had been erased from the registry. Intentionally, officially, by decision of the temple's highest leadership. He flipped through the pages. They were damaged. Entire paragraphs had turned into brown smudges, but he caught fragments. The carriers of the removed classes had no upper limit on their growth. Their potential could not be measured by standard methods. They represented an anomaly within the system. The decision to remove them was made after a carrier of one of the classes single-handedly closed the rift on the northern border. This fact caused panic in the council. Not gratitude, not admiration. Panic. A person without a ceiling could not be accounted for in the registry, could not be assessed, could not be placed in the ranks, could not be predicted. And the AirNAD system was built on predictability. If every person has a ceiling, then every person can be placed in their place, in the ranks, into a family, into work, into life. A person without a ceiling broke this scheme, not by force, by the very fact of their existence. If one person can grow infinitely, then the ceilings of the others are not absolute. That means the system is not a law of nature, but a construct. And if it is a construct, then it can be dismantled. Kyle closed the book. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from understanding. His mistake, his zeros, his empty field instead of a ceiling. This is not a glitch. This is that very remote class, or one of 2. He wasn't the first. There were others before him, and the temple had destroyed them. Not physically. Worse, erased them from the records, from memory, from the very possibility of existence. Every child born with this class over the course of 600 years had been marked as an error. And what happened to them next? The book didn't say. But Kyle could guess. Error meant 0. 0 meant uselessness. Uselessness in a world where numbers decide everything meant poverty and early death. Sickness, hunger, bandits. Infant mortality in the villages was already high. A boy with zeros didn't survive. Not because he was killed, but because he wasn't protected. He remembered what the prompt had said. Kyle wasn't the first defective in 1,000 years. He was the first to survive past 10. He survived because his mother loved him, because Sarah Varon carried more than she should have, because she didn't abandon a child with zeros despite the shame and poverty and chronic back pain. Because a mother's love isn't measured by potential. He sat in the library and looked at the old book without a cover, and thought of Sarah, of how she cried into her pillow the first night, of how she carried him for 2 hours from the temple to their home, about how she did his exercises in a whisper, like a prayer, about how she stood in the doorway with her back straight and let him go to the Duke, She saved his life. Not just once, every day. Every day for 7 years before his arrival, she saved the life of a child the world had written off. And for 7 years after. He put the book back on the shelf, memorized its place, memorized its contents, told no one. His work with Adeline continued. By the end of her 2nd month at the estate, she was walking. Slowly, with a cane, but she walked. 20 steps across the room, 30 down the hallway, 40 through the garden. The Duchess walked beside her and counted every step. Nerve conduction in her limbs rose from 0.2 to 1.1. Still below normal, but enough to walk. Enough to live outside of bed. Adeline was changing, not just physically. She started talking more, started asking questions, not about her illness, about the world, about the system, about why some people are worth more than others. She asked like a child seeing the world outside her room for the first time. And Kyle answered, carefully, without revealing what he knew, but guiding her. What do you think is more important, potential or effort? She thought. She answered. Potential tells you what you can do. Effort says what you want. He nodded and asked the next question. What if potential lies? She fell silent, looked at him. A spark lit up in her eyes. That very one. The one that had burned in Kyle from day one. Doubt. Wholly scientific doubt. The first step towards ceasing to believe in the system that broke you. At the end of the 2nd month, he said goodbye to Adeline, temporarily. She stood by the window of her room, without her cane, holding onto the windowsill, looking down at him. He stood in the courtyard with his travel bag. You'll come back, he nodded. I'll do my exercises. Every day. I know. She paused. Kyle. Yes. Thank you isn't enough. I'll find another word. Someday. He smiled. Take your time. He walked toward the gate. Eric was waiting with a horse. The Duke stood on the steps. In his hands, an envelope with a seal. A letter of recommendation for the Academy. Kyle took the envelope. He bowed. He mounted the horse behind Eric. The Vaughan estate was left behind. Ahead lay Taryn, his mother, Emma, and 2 months until the entrance exam. Taryn greeted him with rain, light, warm, autumnal. His mother stood by the gate. She saw him from a distance. He jumped off the wagon without waiting for it to stop and ran. She hugged him, tightly, silently. He buried his face in her stomach and stood like that for a minute. Because you can be 24 years old and a graduate student from Boston and still need someone to hug you after a long journey. Mom. You've gotten taller. He hasn't gotten taller. She had become more upright. Her back was straight, her shoulders were open, her chin was slightly raised. The Sarah he had left 2 months ago and the Sarah standing before him were different people. Not on the outside, on the inside. She looked at him and didn't avert her eyes. She spoke and didn't apologize for every word. She had changed. While he was away, Emma came every day. She helped with the herbs. She trained by the stream. And something else. Kyle realized what exactly when he saw the shelf with the herbs. The jars were labeled, in neat childlike handwriting. Names, properties, dosages. Emma had taught Sarah, or Sarah had taught Emma, or they had taught each other. 2 women, an herbalist and a 7-year-old girl. They had created a system, without him. He smiled and felt proud, not of himself, of them. Emma came in the evening, barged into the house without knocking. "You're back." He nodded. She sat down across from him, looked him in the eyes. "Seriously, I need to show you something." They went to the stream. It was almost dark. Emma stood on the bank. She closed her eyes. She raised her hands, and the water in the stream stopped. It didn't rise. It didn't swirl. It stopped. The stream kept flowing, but a 2-meter-long section in front of Emma froze, like glass. Kyle watched. He was silent. She held the water still for 10 seconds. Then she let go. The stream began to flow again. She turned to him. "That's not all." She crouched down. She lowered her hand toward the water, without touching the surface, and the water rose up, toward her palm, a thin thread, like a string, like a silver thread in the moonlight. She held it for 3 seconds. Then the thread fell back into the stream. Kyle sat down on the grass, quietly, because he needed a minute. 2 months. In 2 months, without his guidance, Emma had learned to control water at a level not described in any of a Mernad. Because the textbooks described magic through potential and spells, but Emma worked through resonance, through a sub-parameter that didn't exist in the system. She bypassed the system without breaking it. She simply took a different path. The water resonance was 4.7 at the last check. Kyle took her hand. He closed his eyes. The panel flashed. The foreign sub-parameters appeared clearer than ever. Kyle's perception had grown over these months, and now he could see 20 lines out of 30-some. Water resonance 14.2. From 4.7 to 14.2 in 4 months. Tripled. He opened his eyes, looked at Emma, red-haired, freckled, with dirty knees and burning eyes. In 3 years, they were going to give her away to the miller's son, because her magic potential was 11. He felt a chill, not from the evening air, from the thought. How many Emmas like her had already been given away? How many had been buried in the ground? How many had been buried alive in strangers' homes and strangers' lives because a single number in the top line of the window said they weren't worth more? He spent 2 months in Terran. He trained, he read, he worked with Emma, he helped his mother. By the end of that time, his stats were Strength 3.8, Agility 3.1, Stamina 4.2, Intelligence 3.4, Perception 2.1, Charisma 0.8. A year. 1 year since waking up in the temple courtyard. 12 months of daily training. 365 days without a single miss. And here are his numbers. 4s. 3s. By Ernad's standards, this is the level of a strong 12-year-old. He was 8. For a boy with a grade-level deficit and starting from 0, this was impossible. For Kyle, it was math. Daily progress multiplied by the number of days. Nothing more. The minimum threshold for the Warriors Guild. Strength 3, Agility 2, Stamina 3. He passed, with room to spare. But the Guild wasn't his goal. His goal was the Academy. The entrance exam consisted of 3 parts: physical, magical, theoretical. He'd passed the physical one, the theoretical one even more so. The magical part? He had no magic. Class? Error. No spells, no mana, no magical potential. How to pass the magical part of the test without magic? He thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th, he found the answer. In that very old book without a cover that he had read by heart in the Voynov library, word for word, because an IQ of 3.4 gave him a memory close to photographic. The Academy's entrance exam didn't require magic. It required a demonstration of ability, any ability. Magic was the most common, but not the only one. A blacksmith could demonstrate forging. A healer could demonstrate diagnosis. A craftsman could demonstrate mastery. The key word, diagnosis. He could show what he had done for Adeline, for Mary, for the girl with the inflammation. He could lay a hand on a person and name a disease that no healer could see. It was an ability, real, measurable, not magical, but not ordinary either. He wrote in his petition, ability, diagnosis of hidden parameters through tactile contact, class, error, recommendation, Duke Matthias Vaughan. The petition was sent off with a special messenger sent by the Duke. On the day of his departure, his mother hugged him again, for a long time. Then she let go. She looked into his eyes. "Come back." He nodded. Emma stood nearby. She wasn't crying. She wasn't threatening. She was just standing there. Then she said quietly, "I'll do the same. In 2 years. Wait for me." He looked at her, red-haired, freckled, with a water resonance of 14.2 and a magic potential of 11, with burning eyes and dirty knees. It was agreed. The capital of Ernad was called Cairnham. Kyle saw it from the hill 2 hours before arriving. White walls, temple spires, academy towers, thousands of rooftops. The city was 10 times larger than anything he had ever seen in this world. He walked, alone. The Duke had offered a carriage, but Kyle refused. A carriage bearing the Vaughan coat of arms would attract attention. A boy with a knapsack wouldn't attract any attention. The entrance exam took place in the Academy's great courtyard, an open area the size of a football field. Stone stands along the perimeter, the judges' table on a raised platform. There were 5 people at the table, 3 Academy instructors, 1 representative of the Warriors Guild, and 1 priest of the Temple of Numbers. Kyle saw the priest, and his heart sank. Not Talmer. Another one. Older, with a stern face and eyes that looked right through people, as if through glass. There were 83 candidates. Kyle counted them, ages 10 to 17. He was the youngest, and the most unremarkable. A skinny 8-year-old boy in peasant clothes, among the heirs of noble houses in armor and robes. The physical test came first. Running, pull-ups, sparring with a wooden sword. Kyle ran the distance in the middle of the overall standings. He did 8 pull-ups. He lost the sparring match to a big guy in the 3rd minute. An average result, not disgraceful, not outstanding. The theoretical test came second, a written exam, 100 questions. History, laws, class theory, the structure of the system. Kyle answered 97 out of 100. 3 questions concerned details not found in the books of the ducal library. He saw the instructor grading his work raise his eyebrows. Then he looked at Kyle. Then at the work. Then back at Kyle. An 8-year-old peasant had performed better than most heirs with private tutors. The magic test was third. The candidates went out one by one. They demonstrated their abilities. The judges evaluated. Fireballs, ice spears, earthen walls, healing spells. Swordsmen chopped down stone pillars. A blacksmith forged a horseshoe in 3 minutes. An archer hit the target from 200 paces. Kyle went out last. Silence. 82 candidates stared at the boy who'd been put in the wrong class. The judges watched. The stands watched. The temple priest watched. The chair of the committee, an old woman with silver hair and a scar across her left eyebrow, asked, "Candidate Kyle Varen, your ability. Diagnosis of hidden parameters through tactile contact. The silence grew thicker. Demonstrate. Kyle looked at the judges' table. I need a volunteer. Any person with any problem they won't speak of aloud. I will name the problem after a single touch. Silence. Then the temple priest stood up. Slowly. Heavy. Like a man accustomed to his movements, carrying weight. He descended from the platform, approached Kyle, looked down at him. I'll be the volunteer. Kyle looked at him. A priest of the Temple of Numbers. A man from the organization that had struck his class from the registry. A man who could destroy him with a single word in a report. This man stood before him and offered his hand. It was a trap, or a test, or both. Kyle reached out. His palm touched the priest's wrist. He closed his eyes. The panel of the stranger's window unfolded, brighter than ever, clearer. His perception was now 2.1, and he could see almost everything. The priest's primary stats were high. Intelligence, 31 out of 38. Perception, 28 out of 33. Everything within range, everything in place. Subparameters. He went deeper, line by line, dozens of parameters, all normal, all precise, even, like someone who'd taken care of himself his whole life. Almost everything. One line, deep down. Blood flow to the left eye, 0.6. Normal, 3.0. He opened his eyes, looked at the priest. Left eye. You're losing vision in your left eye, slowly, over the last few years, not from old age. Blood isn't flowing properly to the eye. The vessel is narrowed or partially blocked. You don't talk about it because, for a priest, loss of vision means loss of office. Silence. Absolute. The kind of silence that happens when 100 people simultaneously forget to breathe. The priest looked at him. His face was motionless. His eyes were motionless. Then his left hand twitched, barely noticeable. He turned toward the judge's table, sat down in his seat, folded his hands, and didn't say a word. The commission chair looked at Kyle, then at the priest, then back at Kyle. She saw the priest's reaction. Everyone did. Is anything else you'd like to demonstrate? Kyle shook his head. That was enough. He returned to his place among the candidates. The guy next to him moved away. Not out of fear, out of amazement. The results were announced 2 days later. 83 candidates, 30 spots. Kyle Varon, accepted. Class, error. Recommendation, Duke Vohen. Special note, unique ability, requires observation. The last 2 words didn't surprise him. Requires observation. The temple hadn't backed down. The temple never backs down. The temple watches. But he was inside, behind the academy walls, under the protection of student status. For the first time in a year, he wasn't standing in an open field where any priest, any knight, and any drunken neighbor could get him. He was standing behind a wall. A thin one, a temporary one, but a wall nonetheless. On the evening of his first day at the academy, he sat in his room, a tiny room, a bed, a table, a shelf, a window. Outside the window, the spires of Kernam. He looked at the panel. Strength, 3.8. Dexterity, 3.1. Endurance, 4. 2. Intelligence, 3.4. Perception, 2.1. Charisma, 0.8. A year ago, all these numbers were zeros. He closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, of Emma, of Adeline, of Mary, of the fisherman, of the cat, of all the people whose windows he had peered into and told, I know what's wrong with you. He thought of the book without a cover in the Vaughan Library, of the 2 erased classes, of the children with zeros who didn't live to see 10. He thought of Talmer, about the priest on trial whose left eye was dying, about the temple that watches. He opened his eyes. The academy. 3 years of training, 3 years to become someone who cannot be touched, someone with a name and influence and allies, someone who can one day stand before the temple and say aloud what he knew from day one. You're all looking the wrong way. 2 years at the academy passed like one long exhalation. Kyle studied, trained, healed, and waited. He waited for the moment when the world would come to him on its own. And the world came. First came Sona Jung, a 16-year-old swordswoman with an Eastern braid down to her waist and eyes that expressed nothing. Potential sword 52, maximum reached. A wall. She stood by the training ground and watched the younger students hack at the dummies. She watched the way people watch when they've been stripped of meaning. Kyle approached. He stood beside her, silently. She didn't turn around. You're that boy with the flaw. He nodded. Why did you come over? I want to see how you hold the sword. She turned, slowly. Why? Because you've been standing here for 3 days and haven't been training. And a person who loves the sword but doesn't touch it is sick. She looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she held out her hand. Not for a handshake, for a diagnosis. She had heard about his ability. The whole academy had heard. The boy with the flaw who sees what is hidden. He took her by the wrist. The panel unfolded. Key metrics on the ceiling, all of them. Every number hit the upper limit. 52 out of 52, 48 out of 48, 44 out of 44. A wall on all sides. He went into the sub-parameters and found what he was looking for. Blade microcontrol 3.2, no upper limit. Foot support 0.2.8, no upper limit. Breath synchronization with strike 1.9, no upper limit. 3 sub-parameters, 3 doors in a wall that seemed impenetrable. She hadn't hit the ceiling. She'd hit those 6 numbers the whole world was watching. And beneath them were dozens of others. Untouched, unknown, open. He let go of her hand. You didn't reach the ceiling. She frowned. My numbers. Your numbers are 6 lines. You have more than 30 of them, and 3 of them have no upper limit. Silence. He saw her face change, how the stone mask cracked, how something alive appeared in eyes that had expressed nothing, something sharp, hungry. Show me. He showed her. A week before the main academic tournament, he changed 3 things for her. Her breathing, the point of support for her right foot, and the grip of her little finger on the hilt. 3 trifles, 3 sub-parameters, 3 invisible levers. Sonia stepped into the arena against Gareth Brennan, the heir to House Brennan, the top student in the class. Sword potential 58. Higher than Sonia's, stronger, faster, better across all 6 metrics. The hall was full. Instructors, students, guild representatives, and priests. 3 priests of the Temple of Numbers in gray robes. They had come to watch, as always. The fight began. Gareth attacked first, hard, beautifully, confidently. He was a head taller, 2 years older, 6 points of potential stronger. He was supposed to win. He knew it. The hall knew it. Sana knew it. She stood, breathing, evenly, deeply. Every inhale synchronized with her body's position, every exhale synchronized with her movement. She didn't attack. She waited. Gareth struck, wide, powerful, a blow meant to break through her defense. Sana took a step. One step, with her left foot. The little finger of her right hand shifted slightly on the hilt, by a millimeter, maybe 2, and her blade passed by his sword like water past a stone. She didn't parry, she didn't block. She went around it. The tip of her sword touched his throat. Silence. 10 seconds. Then the hall erupted. Applause, shouts. People stood up. The instructor stood up. Even the priests leaned forward. One movement, one quiet step to the side, and the champion lay on the sand. Sana stood over him, silently. Then she turned. Her eyes found Ka, 3rd row, 4th seat from the left. She bowed. To him, not to the judges, not to the hall, to the boy in the 3rd row. And the entire hall turned to see who the winner was bowing to. Kyle sat there, feeling 100 pairs of eyes on him, and among them, 3 pairs of eyes in gray robes. After the tournament, everything changed. People started coming to Kyle, not like in the village, one by one, cautiously. No, at the academy, they came to him openly. Students who had hit a wall, students who had been told they'd reached their limit, students who felt they could do more but didn't know how. He took them in, one at a time. He placed his hand on their wrist. He looked. He found subparameters. He explained. He demonstrated exercises. Within a month, half the class was training using his method. Not the academy's method, Varen's method. The results were impossible. Students who had been stuck in place for 2 years began to improve. Not in the 6 core areas, in those characteristics that no one had noticed. But the effect was visible to the naked eye. Swordsmen became more precise, mages more stable, healers more sensitive, blacksmiths more refined. The academy was abuzz. The temple was silent. It remained silent for 2 months. And then High Priest Velmar arrived at the academy, a 71-year-old man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach above his lips. Head of the registry, the man who guarded the system. He had come on a courtesy visit, officially, an inspection of educational standards, standard procedure. Unofficially, the entire Academy Council knew why he had come. Lena Moore knew, the quiet novice priestess with a notebook. She had been watching Kyle for 6 months. She wrote reports, sent them to the temple. Kyle had known about her from day 1. It's hard not to notice someone who writes down your every word. He didn't expose her, didn't avoid her, just worked right in front of her. Healed, taught, he demonstrated. Every time he helped someone whom the temple had deemed beyond help, Lena took notes. And every time, it became harder for her to send the report. Kyle saw that. He saw her sitting in her room in the evenings, staring at the stack of letters she couldn't bring herself to take to the post office. He waited. Velmar arrived in the 3rd month of the 2nd year of training. Kyle was 10. The meeting took place in the Great Hall, not public, private. Velmar, Kyle, and an empty hall. The old man sat in a chair by the window. Light fell on his face. Wrinkles, age spots, a neat white beard. Eyes clear and cold as a winter stream. With Boy sat down across from him. "You know why I'm here." Kyle nodded. Velmar smiled. That very smile. "You're a smart boy. Too smart for an 8-year-old. "I'm 10. Velmar nodded. 10, of course. "I've read the reports on you. Impressive. Diagnostics through touch, training of hidden parameters, the Varan method. Half the academy is growing faster than it should. He paused. This needs to be stopped. Kyle was silent. Not because I don't appreciate your talent, but because you're breaking what keeps the world in place. The system exists not because it's perfect. It exists because without it, there's chaos. You're letting people grow beyond their potential. That sounds nice. In practice, it means every registry calculation becomes inaccurate. Every military plan falls apart. Every marriage contract loses its foundation. You're not healing people, boy. You're blowing up the foundation. Kyle looked at the old man. Velmar spoke calmly, without anger, without a threat, with the regret of a teacher explaining the obvious to a disobedient student. And that was scarier than any threat, because Velmar believed every word he said. I'm offering you a deal. Stop your public practice. Work under the temple. Under our supervision, we'll give you resources, books, laboratories, anything you want. You will study subparameters, for us, quietly, without fuss. And we won't touch you, or your mother, or Duke Voen, or the girl from Terran. Kyle heard every word, heard the list. Mother, Duke, Emma. Velmar knew about them, knew everything. And he didn't list them by accident. It wasn't a list. It was a threat. Polite, smiling, neat, but a threat. He could agree, could fade into the shadows, could work for the temple and keep quiet, could protect his mother and Emma and Adeline with a single word. Yes, one word, and everyone would be safe. He looked at Velmar, at the old man with the cold eyes, and for the first time in 2 years in this world, he wanted to see his window. Not to diagnose, not to treat, to see. I need to think. Velmar nodded. Of course, think. You have a week. He left. Kyle remained in the empty hall. He sat and watched the dust in the rays of light. He thought. He wasn't thinking about the deal, about the book without a cover, about the 2 erased classes, about the children with zeros, and about a single line he had read between the brown stains of dampness. One of the bearers of the remote class was a priest of the temple. Velmar was 71. He became head of the registry at 30. He became a priest at 14. And what happened before 14? What happened at 9 years old, when a boy with a mistake in the window usually died? Kyle stood up. He left the hall. He walked down the academy corridor, past the library, past the dining hall, past Lena Moore's room. He stopped at her door. He knocked. She opened the door, pale, with a notebook in her hands. She knew about Velmar's visit. Kyle looked at her. Lena, I need your help. It took her 3 days. 3 days in the archives of the Temple of Numbers, to which she, as a novice, had access. 3 days of searching, 3 sleepless nights. She found a record, an old one, a dusty one, hidden in the farthest corner of the lowest storage room, a record about a child, a boy. The village of Corven, year 1003 from the founding. Class. Error. All characteristics 0. Transferred to the temple for observation at the age of 4. Transferred to novices at the age of 7. Granted priest status at the age of 14. Special note. Class changed to priest. Potential established. Seal of Lee imposed. Name. Velmar. Kyle read, and his hands were steady, because he knew. From the moment Velmar listed his loved ones, from the moment the old man smiled, he knew. Velmar was just like him, a boy with an error, A boy with zeros. Boundless. Only Velmar was unlucky. He didn't have a mother who carried more than she should. They took him away at 4, rewrote him, blocked him, put a ceiling on him that he didn't have, and he lived his whole life in a cage and became its guardian. Because it's easier that way. Because if the cage is the norm, then you're not a prisoner. You're just at home. A week later, Kyle stood in the great hall of the Temple of Numbers. Velmar sat in a chair. The temple council occupied 3 rows of benches in a semicircle. 12 senior priests, all in white robes, all with cold expressions. Kyle's mother stood behind him. She had arrived from Terran 2 days ago. She stood beside him and held his hand. Pale, upright, not hunched over. Emma and Adeline were with her. Adeline had come without her cane. For the first time in her life, she stood before strangers without support. Sonia stood slightly to the left, hand on her sword, face stony. Mira Khan stood next to Sonia, in an apron, with burned fingers, with a hammer at her belt. She had come from the capital's forge where she had been apprenticed. Lena Moore stood by the wall, quiet, with a notebook. Her hands were trembling. She had made her choice, and she knew there was no turning back. And 40 more people, students, former patients, people from the village, people from the Voan estate, people he had touched and told, "I know what's wrong with you." They filled the hall to the last seat. Velmar looked at them, then at Kyle. He smiled, the same smile. "Boy, I gave you a week. You brought an army." "This isn't an army. These are people you told had reached their limit." Velmar stood up. "Council, the boy is rejecting the temple's offer. I demand a class confirmation procedure. If his window shows an error, we will impose the seal of limit, and the matter is closed." Silence. Kyle felt his mother's hand, warm, strong. It wasn't trembling. He looked at Velmar, at the old man with cold eyes, at the boy from the village of Corvin who had been taken away at the age of 4. "All right, I'll open the window." Velmar nodded, satisfied. The council leaned forward. The priests prepared themselves. Kyle raised his hand. He placed his palm on the table in front of Velmar and opened the window. Not his own. Velmar's panel unfolded in the air before the entire council. Bright, clear, complete. All 6 primary characteristics, all subparameters, all hidden lines. And at the bottom, beneath all the numbers, beneath all the orderly rows that Velmar had worn like a cloak his entire life, a single line. Suppressed class, boundless, locked at age 9. Silence. Not the kind of silence where people forget to breathe. The silence when the world stops spinning for a single second. Velmar stared at his panel, at the line he hadn't seen in 62 years, the one sealed away when he was 9, when he was a boy with zeros, just like Kyle. His face hadn't changed, the smile hadn't faded, but the hands on the armrests had turned white. The council watched. 12 priests watched their high priest, at the man who had guarded the system for half a century, at the man who was the very thing from which he had protected the world. Sarah slowly turned to Velmar. She didn't know the details. She didn't know about the erased records and registers and seals. But she saw the line, locked at age 9, and she understood. A mother understood a mother. That someone had once done to a 9-year-old boy what she would never have allowed to be done to her own mother. Stood there and cried, silently. The way people cry when they see injustice and can't do anything about it. Sana drew her sword, not as a threat, instinct. She sensed that someone was hurting, and her body responded in the only way it knew how. Lena Moore looked at the line on Velmar's panel and slowly closed her notebook. The last report she would ever write. Kyle stood before the old man, a 13-year-old boy before a 71-year-old guardian. Two boundless, the first and the last, the beginning and the end of the same cell. He spoke softly, so softly that only those standing nearby could hear, but the hall was so quiet that everyone heard. Grandfather, I didn't come to kill you. I came to set you free. Velmar looked at him. The smile finally faded. Beneath it was a face, a real one, an old one, a weary one. The face of a boy who 62 years ago had been told he was a mistake, and who had believed it. He closed his eyes, his hands on the armrests relaxed, and for the first time in 62 years, High Priest Velmar did not control his face. A tear. A single wrinkle appeared, slowly, like water on stone. Just one. The hall was silent. No one moved. Then Kyle turned to the council. 12 priests, 12 guardians of the system, 12 walls around a world that believed the ceiling was a blessing. He raised his hand. He opened his palm. And his own window unfolded before them. Not a mask, the real thing. All the specs, all the subparameters, all 34 lines. Not a single ceiling, not a single upper limit. Numbers that had grown from 0 over 2 years. Honestly, slowly, every day, bit by bit. No magic, no potions, no rituals. Just hard work, just attention, just care framed as science. At the bottom, instead of error, there was now a different word. Boundless. He lowered his hand. He looked at his mother. Sarah stood there smiling, quietly, with tears, but smiling, like a person who had finally seen what she had always known, that her boy wasn't defective, that he had never been defective, that none of them had been defective. They had just all been looking the wrong way. Kyle turned toward the hall, toward the 40 people who had come for him, toward his friends, toward his students, toward those he had helped get back on their feet, and those who had helped him get back on his. He didn't give a speech. He didn't declare war. He didn't demand the overthrow of the system. He said one sentence. The ceiling isn't a law. It's a habit. Then he sat down, next to his mother. He took her hand and closed his eyes. Outside the temple windows, the sun was rising. A new day. The first day of a world in which someone had finally looked where they needed to.